We are now recording. All right. So, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining the very first Kubernetes SIG for VMware. It's a pleasure to be here. This is our very first meeting. We have a few things on the agenda today we're going to discuss, and then we're going to open the floor for questions at the very end. Let me see if I can share a couple of slides I have on my computer here.
So Fabio, are you broadcasting from the US today for our very first VMware SIG?
Yes, I'm here at the VMware headquarters.
Flew over just for this, huh?
Exactly. All right, this should be a PowerPoint on the screen. Let's see if I can actually present that. All right.
Let's see, before we get going, we have Steve out there too? Not quite yet?
Not quite yet. Let's
give it just a minute or two, and let's see if we can make sure Steve's on.
I see Steve on the call now. All right. Let's get over the agenda for today. So we have quick introductions for the SIG leaders. Then we're going to move over to the charter of the SIG. We're going to have some housekeeping items for how to join the SIG and how to participate. We're going to have, Steve is going to go over some updates from the recent Kubernetes 1.10 release, and then we're going to open up the floor for question and discussions. All right. So very quick introduction about myself. My name is Fabio Raposelli. I'm a staff engineer at VMware, working on the Kubernetes upstream team as part of the Cloud Native Apps business unit. I've been involved with open source for a long time now. I don't even remember when my first contribution was. I've been working with Cloud Native application software for the past 4/5 years. And I've done some contributions on Vagrant, Docker Machine, Drone, a couple of those. Recently got interested into Kubernetes back again, and I'm now trying to help out and trying to organize and run the SIG. Steve, you want to?
I'm Steve Wong. I recently rejoined VMware. I've spent a team at Dell, and I've been working on the Kubernetes in the Kubernetes community for those 3 years, primarily in the storage SIG, working on enabling stateful applications to run under Kubernetes and working on some of the volume plugins and CSI work. Before I started on that code team, I was actually a dev architect on the vSphere product and also on the vCloud Air public cloud. So I've got a number of years background in the vSphere area. Anyway, that's my bio. The next thing on the agenda, I think, was the charter of the SIG. Do you want to take that back, Fabio?
Yeah, I just move over the slide to the charter. So the point of having the SIG is not so much of having something done from and driven by VM. It's something that we want to have a way to bridge the communities. So VMware has always had traditionally a large user community, which was also organized through vMods and user groups and so on. And the community is kind of tied to VMware for their platforms, and people are very keen in using our platforms to do many type of infrastructure, many type of workloads running on them. So the idea here is to bridge those two communities, the Kubernetes community and the VMware community, and join the efforts and make sure that we can together make sure that Kubernetes is maintained, supported, and can run as best as possible on the VMware platforms, all of them. You want to add something, Steve?
No, I think that's it. I just want to emphasize that the purpose of this SIG is more for looking forward at the roadmap of the broad category of VMware, the intersection of VMware and vSphere, for things like support issues for a particular deployment at a customer site. This SIG isn't really designed for that. You should just use established support channels. This is more like things where you've got ideas for things that you'd like to get introduced in Kubernetes itself to optimize the experience of using that on a VMware environment. And that could be all of VMware, meaning on-prem using the recently introduced PKS or running in a public cloud. We're willing to address any topics related to Kubernetes and VMware.
Yes, exactly, and I guess that one of the main focus of the SIG is also not to like overlap with other SIGs, but also to drive conversations. Like if in the roadmap there's requests coming in that are overlapping with other SIGs, being the storage SIG or the scheduling SIG or other SIGs. What we want to do is we want to drive those conversations in the right place and make sure that any request, any roadmap items is followed up in the right spot inside the large Kubernetes community. So I guess that we want to help also drive these requirements as much as possible and make sure that the end users are part of this and not just create a roadmap in a vacuum, so to speak. And that's a perfect point you were making, Steve, about the SIG not being the right place for end user support. So we're absolutely open to help people, but maybe this, the community, the call here and the SIG and the discussion is probably not the right place to get support. That is usually driven in a much better way from the regular support channels, being the VMware support team, or even through the Slack channel that we have created in the Kubernetes Slack.
Yeah, I'd just like to
little about that.
To reach out to. I know there's a lot of people because I've met a lot of you, and if you're used to the traditional kind of closed source kind of way products operate, when you want a feature added, you typically talk to your salespeople, maybe the product manager, and it's a longer cycle where you have to work your way up to finally get to a developer that implements these features. I've observed over the past 3 years that open source potentially can work better for you as the user customer if you realize how it works. And channels like this in open source are a vector where you can kind of get to the developers more quickly than that traditional old school closed source method of operation. And this SIG would be a great way to do that. It even allows some interactive discussion as opposed to, that there are some smaller projects where you might potentially put a feature request in an open source repo as an issue. But I think that Kubernetes itself is so big that you're subject to getting lost in the noise. And bringing these things up in a SIG like this is a great way to get the ball rolling and to get some discussion going with regard to what features or changes you might like to see happen. Some of it is broader than just VMware, where it might affect really running Kubernetes on all platforms, but this is the place to bring the requests.
Yeah, let me add one more thing there. VMware definitely cares about Kubernetes, and this is one of those things that we can show for that. Like, we now have this dedicated SIG that we're going to put a lot of resources into. And VMware has been involved in Kubernetes in the past, and I think we're just increasing that presence as the days go on. So I would expect that, like, this SIG, you'll see the attendance increase, not only from other end users that are looking to take advantage of Kubernetes on vSphere and VMware platforms, but also from the actual internal engineers. I think on this call right now we've got 6 folks from VMware or so that are actively involved in Kubernetes, and I expect that to go up to 10 to 20, if not more, as the time goes on.
Yep. Great points. Thanks, Clint. I guess we can move over to the housekeeping items that we have for today, which are really how to get started and participate in the SIG. So we have a couple of things that we consider the main channels, the main media format where the SIG is active. So we definitely have the Kubernetes Slack channel. So kubernetes.slack.com is the official Kubernetes Slack instance, and inside that instance there's many channels created, but there's a few of them that are prefixed with SIG dash that are the official channels for the SIG. So we have, as part of the SIG, we had created this SIG VMware channel. So we're going to find both me and Steve on there, and there's going to be a participation from everybody who's interested in the VMware topic related to Kubernetes. And this might be a place where, given the interactive discussion that are happening in there, where some degree of support can be had. We have a mailing list, which is over in the groups, Google Groups, where you can subscribe, and we have the community calendar. I just want to move really quick to my web browser.
Yeah, by the way, Fabio, let me interrupt you, sorry, but another item is actually these meeting notes themselves. So if you're a first timer who got an invite by email, we're currently running an open Google Doc with the meeting notes. I know some of you, I see 10 participants, but only 7 of you have actually put your name in the meeting notes. So maybe you don't know about those, but it should have come to you with the link to the Zoom itself.
Yep, and if you look at them, I've been taking notes, so I think that as we have these SIGs, we'll be asking people in the beginning to actually be signing up to take notes for the day.
Yeah, let me just fill that in very quickly. So there's a community repo on the Kubernetes, the Kubernetes organization on GitHub. And this community repo has all the information related to the various SIG and working groups happening in the Kubernetes community. And now we have a SIG VMware folder here that contains links to, and these are the most up-to-date links to any material that has to do with the SIG VMware. So we have a link to the meeting notes and agenda, the same meeting notes that Clint and Steve were talking about. And this is an open Google Doc that everybody can read and suggest changes. So you can come here and add your name to it. But we also have our Zoom link meeting here, which given that I'm working from Europe and our daylight saving
yeah, Fabio, I don't know. I think you're sharing only the PowerPoint app and not your whole desktop, so maybe you meant to do something else.
Oh, thank you for noticing that. I didn't even notice I was just sharing PowerPoint. Let me just fix that. Is it better?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yes.
So I was saying that the Kubernetes community repo here has a SIG VMware folder now. And the SIG VMware folder has a README that has all the information and up-to-date information on the various links and material about the SIG, including the meeting notes and the agenda, which is what it was showing before, but you guys weren't seeing it, where you can sign up and see the agenda for the day, and you can add yourself to the attendees list meeting.
And even submit agenda items if there's something you want to bring up on future meetings.
Especially if you have an item you want to discuss in the last part of the meeting, you have the ability to add your name here another topic here, and we can add that to the discussion. And we have all the links here to the mailing list, to the Slack channel. And here you have the time when the call is scheduled for. I use UTC because I was saying that daylight saving times does not overlap correctly between US and Europe, so it's always hard to get the right time. UTC, you have to convert to your time zone, which there's a link here for that. And the last thing on the housekeeping list is to actually make sure you tag any issues on Kubernetes with the SIG VMware label. So if you open up a Kubernetes repo and you browse to the issues, we now have our own dedicated label that you can tag your problems with. So this, for example, is fresh because the label was created not even a week ago. And you can just add the label by sending a command /SIG VMware to the issue.
The advantage of these tags is that as an open source project becomes as enormous as VMware, it's hard to sort out things that are relevant to you versus running in another environment. So this kind of helps the whole community, the system of tagging, so that when a new release comes out, and later in the meeting we'll get to the 110 release that just came out in the past week, you can actually do a sort on features, bug fixes to narrow it down to the specific things that might be relevant to you.
Yeah, it's very useful both for us to understand what's going on and also because this is an easy way for anybody who participates in the SIG to be notified about new issues, new requests, new feature requests, and so on. So it's very important to use that whenever there's something that involves VMware and there's an issue being open or a feature request being open. And that concludes it for the housekeeping items we have today. So
let me add one thing about that calendar. So you see there the line, it says subscribe to the community calendar. So if you tend to use Google for this, if you go to that Kubernetes community calendar, there's a way you can click on there and have this meeting added directly into your Google Calendar with time zone adjustments and everything taken care of. So I recommend that rather than doing it manually. And the calendar entry will be really nice with a link to the agenda and the Zoom link so that when you get that reminder, you'll have a link that you can just click on to immediatally go there.
It's a very good point. Actually, there's in the main page for the Kubernetes community repo, there's a link that is called communication. And here you have a link to the community calendar for Kubernetes. And this is showing all the meetings happening in the Kubernetes community, including our own. So if we open this up real quick, and we're going to see that we have our Kubernetes VMware SIG bi-weekly meeting scheduled for today. And you can add this to your calendar. You can even subscribe to this calendar and have all of them showing up in your own calendar. And we also have the meeting notes link and the Zoom link here. So if you just put this on your calendar, it will make sure that it stays in sync with your any daylight saving time happening, and you're not gonna miss one.
On the housekeeping, I'm gonna, I guess, ask a question because I think it's in the agenda in the Google Doc, but I don't know if it's on your slide. But how to discuss and propose feature requests. How should the community do that?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. So a feature request and any request should be discussed during these meetings. So ideally, we're going to leave a good part of the discussion every other week at the very end in order to discuss any features or requests coming from the community. So ideally, the process here is to, before the call starts, go to the meeting notes and add your topic to the agenda today. So that way we'll make sure that we're going to discuss that idea, that feature request in the next call.
Yeah, and we'll start discussing here, and we've got some people with years of experience in the Kubernetes community. What could happen if this feature request is generic, where it turns out that it applies not only to running Kubernetes on VMware, but on other platforms as well. It may be that the result is that we'll steer continued discussion to a specialized SIG, for example, the storage SIG, where there are a lot of VMware people active doing features specific to storage. But this is a good first. This is a good first landing zone.
And I think
people here, I think, maybe help classify it.
And I think it's also important to just call out the usual Kubernetes process for planning. Some of these features are kind of discussed offline, amongst the SIG members along the different release processes. And then it's really at the beginning of or right after the release that the planning for the next release formally happens, where people sign up and start to do either the implementation or the design of the features. And so features can, overlap over a couple of releases. So if you bring something up, I think we'd be happy to talk about it in this SIG. And it does take time to actually do, but this is a place where you're, engaging directly with engineers that can do some of these things. I have one more question for you, Fabio, that's in the meeting notes. Accessing the recordings. So how should people be accessing the recordings from these meetings?
So accessing the recordings, obviously being the first one today, we don't have a channel yet. So after the meeting is done, I will make sure I'll upload this to a new YouTube channel and make sure it's being published in the Kubernetes playlist. Once I get the link, I will probably ended up sending a PR to the community repo in order to have that listed in our page. And but probably the easiest way to get this, once I get the approval from the manager of the Kubernetes YouTube channel, is to just go to the Kubernetes community playlist on YouTube and watch recordings for our own sake.
Yeah, the other thing I think we'll do is we'll post that link at the very top of this document. So the other SIGs typically keep this meeting notes agenda document running for a period of, say, a year. And we'll go up and at the top of this document, there's more or less some things we'll say are pinned, and we'll have the link to the recordings there. But we'll have to wait until after this first one to have even a home for the recordings, because this is the first recording ever.
Exactly. Okay. So next on the agenda is the Kubernetes 110 update.
Yeah. So speaking of features, can you bring up the agenda doc on that section? Because I listed the things there, and since you've got it up, that might be more convenient. So there, as it turns out, the 110 release that just came out has a long list of features and bug fixes, but there are actually quite a few that relate to running Kubernetes on vSphere. So I'm not going to go do a deep dive into each of these, but the meeting notes here give you the link, and the first step of that link is a description of what was done. They're divided. You can see in the uppercase here what categories they're in. The first one is listed as auth, where vSphere related operations were failing authentication errors. I think the actual observation on that, it was a bug. It was related to mounting volumes, I believe, when I last looked at it. But if you click on that link for 57978, that takes you to the pull request, the actual source code check-in that resolved this. And from there, you can actually find the original bug request if you're interested in that level of detail. So I don't think we'll make this meeting so dry that we're going to sit here reading things that are already on these websites, but I just want people to be aware of a quick 1 or 2 minute summary of the things that got touched on here. So a lot of these were related to authentication, storage, and volume mounts. In general, I think, Clint, you and I were discussing on Slack that some of these were actually tied to specific versions of Kubernetes and specific versions of vSphere. So some of the things on the list actually were things introduced in 1.9 that worked fine in 1.8, and then 1.10 got them back working the way they were. That's kind of typical of Kubernetes release cycles. Did you have anything to add, Clint?
No, I think that covers it. I think these are the core things to think about with 1.10 and vSphere 6.5. And I think that second one in your list is a kind of a critical update to regarding using storage with 6.5 and Kubernetes. So yeah, I think that covers it. Fabio, anything from you?
No, I think it covers pretty much everything. I guess at the point, the only point maybe wanted to make sure it comes across is that, especially for the second issue there, we have support for that now. We have support for 6.5, which is a current version of vSphere. So that's a kind of a big deal for us, because we're people with the current vSphere version can self-provision Kubernetes clusters. Okay.
So I think we're 30 minutes into what was scheduled as 1 hour, but it's not surprising that this first kickoff meeting is a little short, unless people at the last minute want to throw in discussion topics. The other thing that I think we might do going forward is to have some invited guest speakers and presentations that might, on topics that might be of general interest to people running Kubernetes in a VMware related environment. And we're open to suggestions of things that you might be interested in, but your two chairs here, I think, could prime the pump a little bit by coming up with some of these for future meetings.
Is there anybody out there? Sorry, Fabio, go ahead.
No, I mean, having a demo slot during this bi-week call is definitely something we may want to have, even starting from the next one, at least to show what we've been working on and what is already out there.
Yeah. Is there anybody out there on the call today that wants to ask any questions? Anybody want to introduce themselves so that we know where you're from and what you're interested in with Kubernetes and VMware?
Yeah, we're particularly interested in users because we're bringing to the table a lot of engineers who work on the product, but a big point of this group is to give users an opportunity to interact with actual developers.
Well, I have one thing to add for 1.10. It was also non-user facing, but we started adding functional tests for the vSphere cloud provider that run against the VC simulator, which is part of the Go vMommy project. Ongoing work, there's still more to be done, but it kind of enables CI and people who don't actually run VMware to be able to run these tests, which is particularly important when there's any type of change to provider interface. There's been instances in the past where refactoring or some type of enhancement to cloud provider interfaces broken the vSphere cloud provider. So the idea is that we can catch those little things a lot earlier. And there's still end-to-end tests that get run on vSphere infrastructure, but those take quite a while to run. And even with those, the configuration matrix or possible configuration matrix is not something you necessarily want to test completely on real infrastructure. It would just take way too long. So we're going to continue to do some work there, and the first kind of pass at that is included in the 110 release.
That's great, Doug. Thanks. Okay, I guess we can open the floor for any type of question, really any type of discussion we want to have on this very first SIG call. Any takers? All right, it's very quiet today. It's not surprising it being the first call we have, so it's
Yeah, I think we didn't even have that much time to get word out on this one because, you know, I was actually kind of surprised at how rapidly the Kubernetes community responded to the request to even create this SIG.
okay.
Yeah, Fabio, let's wrap it up, and you know,
Yeah.
we'll make sure we put together a agenda for the next meeting that you guys can all see ahead of time, and we'll be looking forward to chatting with everybody.
Okay, sounds great.
Absolutely.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
See you
Thanks
guys.
for joining. See you next time.